Welcome, everybody, to our webinar. Sorry, we're just a couple of minutes late starting, but we normally allow a couple of minutes anyway for some late joiners. But great to see the waiting room filling up with loads of people joining, probably from all around the world. It's really great to have you here. I know how busy it is for everyone in academia at the moment. So, yeah, we really appreciate you giving up your time, and we're really pleased, of course, that this is an interesting topic to you all. Well, of course, it's an interesting topic, AI and education and assessment all over the world at the moment. So really great. Please feel free to say hi in the chat. Hi, we're told. And let us know where you're calling in from. It's always nice to see people joining from all over the world, which is really great. So just to confirm, this webinar is all about the impact of AI in context of assessment and education. And we'll be talking about simulations and AI resistance, including detection software and things like that, but also more generally, AI in higher education, obviously ChatGPT and all other kind of generative AI tools that have been filling the news over the past 12 months and before as well. Everyone's trying to kind of make sense of things. We'll be talking a little bit about impact on teaching methods, assessment challenges, and solutions as well. So really excited to get into the conversation, and supported by my colleague Peter, who'll be managing the chat and answering questions, but also leading on the Q&A session a bit later. Feel free to say hi, Pete.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking the time out for what's lined up to be a really exciting and engaging conversation. Thanks again.
Yeah, no worries. And perhaps before I just do a little bit of an introduction into simulations as well, before we get into the conversation, just to introduce our two guest speakers, which we're really privileged and pleased and it's very nice to have you both here. Emma Connor and Gerhard as well. Emma, but both from Greenwich Business School at University of Greenwich. And Emma, I know you've been receiving all sorts of nominations and receiving all sorts of awards at Greenwich for innovative teaching practices, but also I think Rising Star of last year, for example, if I'm not mistaken. But please feel free to introduce yourself as well, Emma.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me well? Is my first question always in a webinar, right?
Yes.
Good. So I'm Emma Connor. I'm a teaching fellow in digital marketing in the School of Management and Marketing in Greenwich Business School, but I'm also the incoming program leader for the new MSc Digital Marketing Management, which is very exciting. I've taught across different subjects, but I've returned to my love of marketing now. I'm also a PhD student in consumer behavior, and I've taught across three different simulations. So it's a pleasure to see you today, and I look forward to talking about my experiences with you.
Well, really glad to have you, Emma, and thanks for the introduction. And Gerhard, over to you as well to introduce yourself. And actually, just to say that we've met both of you some years ago as you were both embarking on a journey to evaluate our simulation software, and then it was subsequently deployed and embedded at Greenwich. And I think since then, Gerhard, it's been great to see kind of like how much you've kind of positioned yourself as a bit of an authority on the subject of AI. And I know you have like all these videos on your YouTube channel, for example, on AI. So it sort of also made real sense to have you here as well. But please introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, so hello everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Gerhard Kristandl. I am Associate Professor in Technology Enhanced Learning and Accounting as well. And what you just gave us a long description is basically just short for tech nerd, because that's what I am. And I'm really invested in this new technology. I find it very exciting, interesting, and hopefully this will come across in connection with simulations and assessment today. So we were ahead of our time actually getting it in to Greenwich a couple of years back.
Yeah, well, absolutely, yeah, and it was really great that now, like, you're both able to kind of also, be our guests today, talking not only about the impact of AI more generally, but also then specifically about like bringing that back to simulations as well. And since then, we're having countless conversations also with other colleagues at Greenwich Business School about similar approaches as well, which is really nice too. Okay, well, before we get into the kind of topics, just for a bit of context for everyone, we're just going to summarize a little bit about what we mean by business simulations and how those are typically used. So I'll just take a few slides to do that. So for example, well, Edumundo, as you probably know, we've been delivering management simulations in higher education for over 20 years, and they're all web-based platforms. So we have platforms which can cover most business school subjects, but they're all web-based, just no software to install. They just work on the browser. And we're talking about something where, students manage a company in teams of maybe 4 or 5. It's flexible, and they'll then manage that company over a number of virtual years or rounds, where one round equates to 1 year of operations. Highly competitive, of course, it's gamification, and it's a dynamic algorithm. So student teams competing against each other to win, ultimately. Although it doesn't matter who wins or loses in terms of the learning, you can often learn from failure as well, of course. We can cater for all student levels, so right from foundation right through to MSc level and MBA level. And a number of our simulations are very flexible as well. So there's certain tweaks that we can make, but we can cover most subjects within the business school. Typically, what we find is that these simulations are often used strategically to improve and enhance student engagement and study success, of course. So typically, we see much better module feedback scores and linking to satisfaction as a whole across the business school and across the university more generally. But also, linking to continuation and progression. Of course, it's about boosting the skills, the employability skills, which come through regardless of the subject and come through really strongly. So clear links to graduate outcomes there as well. And often we find that, the business schools that adopt our simulations will often start to use that as part of their marketing proposition to recruitment as well, to entice students. It's what students want these days, of course. And just to say, very quickly, so here's a range of a snapshot of the different simulations that we have. Actually, it's there's many more than just these, but these are kind of like the core ones we have. And there's some examples on the right there of the sorts of subjects that typically these simulations are used in. So I think I'll stop sharing at that point. As I say, just thought it was helpful to give a brief introduction and a bit of context into what we're talking about today. But perhaps it's also useful to now, start the conversation off a little bit. I know that, through conversations we've had already with our guest speakers, with Gerhard and Emma, it's important that, we acknowledge at least that everyone, I'm sure everyone here is really busy and, dealing with everything that's involved in the world of academia, and to be expected to also be an expert on artificial intelligence and generative AI is, we just don't have the time for it, isn't it? But yet somehow everyone is being asked to somehow consider this and the impact of this on their teaching, on assessment and everything else. So hopefully today will be really valuable for everyone. But we're also, keen to keep the conversation going afterwards as well. So please stay in touch afterwards. For now, I think, was there a couple of things, Peter, you wanted to mention as well about, I think, the JISC report and some of the latest news?
Yes, thanks, Leon. Just to put it into context, we're going to introduce a couple of polls through the course of the webinar, looking at the JISC report, which is there's been a number of them actually, but the one that we've been looking at is looking around the types of concerns that are being voiced by students, and they've also quite helpfully made some suggestions and had comments on policies, guidelines, initiatives that institutions could be taking up to help address some of those. So I'll drop them in at the appropriate moment. We'll just like to get an insight into whether these concerns are mirrored at your institutions, and then just a very delicate question about what types of policies and guidelines that you might be putting in place to support your students. That's it.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, I think perhaps let's just over to our guest speakers then. Perhaps some initial thoughts on just how big this subject has become all of a sudden in over the last 12 months.
Yeah, I could start by sharing my screen if that's all right.
Yeah, feel free.
So I hope you can see it all. Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, welcome to this webinar. We, Emma and I, been working with Edumundo for a while, mostly Emma. I was just the enabler to get it in, but Emma was the one really using it in teaching. And to put it in context a little bit, I'd like to set a kind of a common understanding in the beginning, because we were talking about academic integrity and how AI, Gen AI. So when I say AI, I mean generative AI, because there's other types of AI, of course. The record a little bit straight, because we should consider in general our students as people that don't want to cheat, that want to know how to use AI in an ethical manner, and that we guide them. That means we also need to understand how use AI ethically, because that was the first reaction in early 2023. We have a 1-year anniversary, if you think about it. A year ago, ChatGPT burst onto the stage, right? So almost to the day, I don't know the exact day, but it was November 2022. And it has been quite a wild ride since then. And the first reaction by educational institutions, at least those publicly voiced, was, all right, this new thing this is able to write similar to a human being, they're gonna use it for cheating. Yeah, so called it cheat GPT. I think in general, we should say that our students do not want to cheat outright. Okay, you always have those that of course have this intent, but in general, our students have quite a nuanced approach, as we know by now. Yeah, so Peter mentioned the JISC report. I'm assuming you're talking about the same JISC report when I'm saying this is where they basically surveyed students. So what do you think about this Gen AI thing? And they show a very nuanced understanding at this point, by and large, right? So how they're using it? They're using it for writing, for understanding concepts, explain to me like I'm 5 years old is a classic. For maths, for coding, for facilitating research, for generating images for fun, and some also for some of my students, even for their personal lives, to get them organized. So they advocate in that report for an integration of AI into their education to prepare themselves for the future, because it'll be with us, it'll stick with us, it'll be part of society. At one point, we're going to be quite used to it. Like you're going to be used to having an Alexa at home and talking to Alexa as if it was a human being. And at the same time, they do voice these concerns about digital literacy, data security, transparency of how we are using it as educators, how institutions are using generative AI. In marking the assessments, maybe in creating assessment questions and so on and so forth. And I think with all of that, the academic integrity question moves to a slightly different stance, not to say that everybody's cheating and do we need to prevent it at any cost, but it makes us question our own approaches more, asking, okay, is my teaching still up to speed? Am I doing the right thing? And of course, with the plethora of information coming our way about AI, a certain AI fatigue has settled in some educators. There's so much out there that it's almost impossible to keep up. So I want to say that academic integrity is a crucial topic, and it remains a crucial topic. And it has given another boost to the so-called authentic assessment type, these types of assessment that doesn't test just the knowledge, but how students apply knowledge in a real-world context. And simulations are a type of authentic assessment. So to really understand, there's some scribble there. I don't know where that came from. So to really understand why authentic assessments, in particular simulations, are AI resistant or more AI resistant, because I'm a bit loath about talking about AI risk. So AI resistance against misuse of AI in use for passing an assessment without really performing. Let's put ourselves also here on the same level. Traditional assessment models, so I'm talking about the typical exam, even pen and paper, fall back to the olden days. Pen and paper exams that are still prevalent in institutions. They prioritize knowledge testing over competence testing and application testing and performance evaluation. They also struggle to test the ability of students to apply knowledge in a real world context to new and unfamiliar situations, which is real life, right? And there is an incentivization, I don't know if that's the right word, but it is incentive for students in these types of assessment to focus on passing the assessment. That's their goal, but not the learning per se. That kind of gets sidelined and becomes even gets to the point that if it's not assessed, students won't do the work. I don't know if educators in the chat have that situation, or I had this as a student myself, that as an educator has limited the topics that they are assessing us on to, like, out of 20, give me a list of 10 topics we assess you on. So what's my incentive to learn about the other topics and how it all fits together, right? So the problem of these traditional assessments clearly is they don't go beyond the know what, the knowledge testing. They don't test the know how and the show how.
Absolutely.
Right?
Gerhard, sorry to interrupt. I was just kind of thinking it's that age-old thing of students just focusing on what they have to do, isn't it, to get the credit, and not doing things that are assessed ultimately. So savvy students essentially.
So ultimately, this is where the simulations come in, right? As because the question about the authentic assessments, that's not new. That has been given a boost over the pandemic with online teaching and so on. And now we're more so with AI because they are more resistant. And why are they? Because they are immersive. You know, it's not just there's an output that I need to generate. They need to immerse themselves in a decision-driven learning environment. It engages them. They get much more agency in what they do. The process is as important as the output, because the output might differ between student teams if they use simulations such as what Edumundo provides. And there's much more emphasis on the critical thinking part. Is when decisions are being made within a simulation, something unfamiliar comes around. There's much more emphasis on the evidence-based analysis and the reasoning. And if we're talking about AI, we need to talk about HI as well, right? Human intelligence that needs exactly these skills honed, and simulations can provide an incredibly important factor in developing that in our students. Developing competencies, not just finding the easiest solution, but the solution that works best, that is the most efficient and effective. And there might be several solutions coming out of a simulation case study that fulfill that criterion. When they work in groups, there's much more group dynamic. It's much more resistant to a direct AI input in terms of we can use the AI to do the work for us entirely and then submit our results and pass, right? Which is it's not as easy to do in a simulation. And then ultimately, you mentioned the competitive aspect. I think that's really gives them even more immersion and agency in what they do and what they produce, and gives them a sense of pride as well in what they provide at the end. And it's real time. And you mentioned in an earlier chat, Leon, it's playing the game, right? And the question here is, why do simulations, also from a technological basis, make it so difficult for AI to be misused and even embrace AI as a facilitating technology instead? The typical features, Edumundo simulations are end-to-end encrypted. They're closed systems. It's unless they're really nifty and technologically very advanced, then I would ask myself if they could do that, they could figure that out. They should work in tech development and earn money straight away. End-to-end encryptions, closed systems, preventing any direct intervention, unless there's a rail-guarded or guardrailed system, an AI that the provider admits actively. Real-time interaction makes it really difficult for participants.
I was just going to add, Gerhard, to expand, I suppose I think what you're saying is essentially by end-to-end encryption. So generative AI won't be able to access what's behind closed doors, essentially, isn't it?
That's right. It's difficult to interfere with these closed systems. So there's a couple of closed systems now coming to the rise with the expressed purpose of preventing any direct AI intervention. And I think that's a massive advantage on the technological side, and gives peace of mind to the educator to do that. And the use of unique data sets that are changed according to the decisions that the students team are making, it makes it really difficult for an AI to mimic human behavior in that way, and in extension for students who have ill intent to abuse and misuse AI in that context. So
I think, sorry, Gerhard, just to jump in as well a little bit, I think the unique data sets is really important, isn't it? Because actually, if you've got a whole load of different students that are working on the same simulation, but actually the data that they're looking at is different to what the other students are looking at, then when it comes to, for example, if we're to come back to your point about, student coming at this from the perspective of maybe students want to cheat, maybe they want to ask ChatGPT to do their assignment for them. Well, actually, they're going to have to get so involved in the simulation anyway to know what to ask ChatGPT that's probably a skill in itself, right? To be able to come up with the correct prompt to really tell the generative AI all of the things it would need to know. So I think that's really something to stress, I would say.
Yeah, it's ultimately it's a cost effort benefit balance, right? So if they have to put a lot of effort into cheats and then realize it's actually no point, because if I do my work as intended within the simulation alongside the process of learning and not just to get to an output I can submit, it's a realization that there's actually no point in putting the effort in to cheat. Is less getting me to my hoped for result than actually immersing myself in the case and really be in the learning and not just ogle the output at the end of the simulation, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I'll even go as far as to add that, even if you don't have what we might regard as an authentic assessment, even if it's quite a traditional assessment, perhaps in the form of kind of like a reflective piece, that, even if that's the case, it's still going to be very difficult in correlation with what's happened in the simulation. It's still going to be very difficult if you match the two up, sort of, let's check what you've done in the simulation, what your strategy was, everything else, and then marrying that up with your assessment. Even, as I say, if it's not authentic, then it's still kind of going to be hard, isn't it, for students, I would say.
Yeah, it requires much more reflection and critical thinking. That's something that AI can try to mimic, but it can't do it. And that will be the big difference between how to approach this. So in a conversation before the webinar, Leon wanted to know, how's AI detection looking at the moment, and is it effective?
Oh, and Gerhard, sorry to interrupt, Gerhard. Just sure. Before you lead on this slide, I can see a question from Witold in the chat about the images. Are the images generated by DALL-E?
These ones, yeah, DALL-E 3, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, well spotted, Witold. Sorry, Gerhard. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. We know in the context of AI, why not generate the images with AI? So we had a conversation, right? Is AI detection software effective? Because you see a lot of claims on LinkedIn by various vendors of well-known vendors, I won't name them, that they found an AI detection software way and tool that can detect AI reliably. Unfortunately, I need to burst the bubble, because the short answer, there is no such tool out there that is reliable enough that we can, with peace of mind again, use in order to detect AI-generated content. The longer answer is that there's independent tests. Again, if you do your Google research there, you find plenty of those. That none of those tools at the moment can provide, and that's the premium tools, provide something better than 70% accuracy. And that is by a long shot not enough, because we would be opening as institutions a can of worms if we're starting to accuse students that are that with without enough evidence, without enough meat to the bone when we accuse them, and it's not trustworthy enough. And some vendors might claim that their tools are reliable, but they are not, unfortunately. That is because how AI generates text. Because how is similarity picked up? Similarity is picked up by previous text and comparing to previous text. But what does AI generate? New text, yeah, based on, of course, a lot of training data. So, and there's a lot of ways to circumvent this. Very easy. Throw in a couple of typos, change a couple of, put a couple of grammatical errors in, run it through a series of chatbots. It's not just ChatGPT out there, and it's impossible to detect reliably. And there's also the problem of false accusations, and in particular was highlighted that non-native English writers are very often picked up incorrectly as that they provided AI-generated text. So I'm a non-native English speaker and writer. And how do we learn English in school? We learn standard phrases, a limited vocabulary, and then we use that. And that's what these detectors tend to pick up on, yeah, the limited range of vocabulary and expressions. And that makes this very problematic. So
yeah, I think Gerhard, I also heard that like a lot of non-native English speakers, if they're required to do their assessment in English, they will maybe start in their home language first and then put it into a translation software, which you could argue, well, that's not necessarily plagiarism, is it? But then because of the way that that's been translated, the detection software will pick that up as you've cheated.
Exactly. That's, I mean, it's just not accurate enough. It causes way too many false errors and accusations, and then that this is a problem on an institutional level goes without saying. And at the same time, it deters students. Yeah, if they're afraid of using the software, maybe just for explain a concept to them, and then they use similar wording to use that. Or it holds them away from something that they should be exposed to, because it will be part of their personal future and professional careers. So we would do them a disservice, and also with a critical discourse of the students with the Gen AI that we should be facilitating in a way to critically evaluate, is the AI output useful? In what way? Or how is it not useful? And the problem is, that adds a burden to the educators now, because if there is no tool that educators can rely on that detects it reliably, then they need to learn and build their AI critical literacy. And the problem is, we're all very busy educators. Not everybody has the time to do that, to learn about the potential of Gen AI, the limitations that it has, the pedagogies that need to be involved, maybe even new pedagogies entirely, and the ethical considerations, and how to build that in and assess their own assessments. Are they AI resistant, yes or no? And that's important, these pre-skills, and also what follows after. What do I do if I find my assessment is not as AI resistant as I hoped for? And simulations again come in here, because they take a lot of that off, because simulations per se, as authentic assessment and authentic learning tool, facilitate this much better because of the reasons that we just discussed earlier.
I think, Gerhard, it's probably an appropriate point to also, talk a little bit about the university's response to AI as well. Like, we were talking about detection software and things, and I know when we've spoken in the past, you've raised this point that, like, when we go back 12 months, when this kind of really came to the scene in a big way, that a lot of universities were really reacting in very different ways, and some completely outright banning AI. And I think, since then, as you pointed out, like a lot of, oh, you're already coming on to this. But okay, but before you do, perhaps
Peter has the hand raised,
beautifully managed there, Leon. Just before we move on to that, I just want to launch the first poll, which is just a real snapshot, and it's just looking to get a little insight into the student concerns and perspectives at all of the attendees' relevant institutions. So it's a multi-choice question, just tick all, any that apply to you. That should now be launched. You should all see that. And just a little bit of housekeeping. We've had some conversation about the definition of digital literacy. I think that's been understood. But there was a couple of points about this idea around cheating, and a couple of questions came up about whether there is any thoughts or research on propensity to use tools like this, shall we say, to teach in terms of different profiles, study levels, regions of the world. I don't know if there's any thoughts or any sort of initial feedback or comments on that particular point.
Yeah, it's something that universities and educators are finding their way into, because it's not entirely clear. Often it depends on what a university sees as acceptable, yeah, and how to define it. It was one of the reactions. See it here on my screen. The policies, yeah, that they develop, typically based on already existing policies, makes sense. You know, as a short-term measure to deal with that, and then what is acceptable use. And if you look around, again, a Google search about academic integrity policies in UK universities, for example, if you focus on the UK or any other part of the world, shows you there's a lot already out there. But if you compare them, then it really depends on what is too much from the perspective of the institution and what is still acceptable. And that might differ. So it will depend ultimately on what your institution regulates in absence of a broader regulation. Yeah, EU is looking at the AI Act. The US has just initiated legal regulation considerations about, you know, watermarking AI output and so on, to really inform institutions like universities what is acceptable use. There was a big question across the entire year. What is it? What is acceptable? What is ethical? And that was not 100% clear. So should I wait for the end?
Okay, well,
should I continue?
I think yeah, let's close the poll now. I'll end the poll. I think it was supposed to be a multi-choice poll, but as a couple of people noticed, it was only possible to select one. But I think perhaps we'll have a look at those results and, yeah, maybe see if we can kind of build that into some of the discussion at the end as well, if there's time. Yeah, please continue, Gerhard.
Yeah, so as you nicely transitioned, nice segue over to the next slide, so to speak. How did universities react? If you think back to especially early 2023, there was a lot of ban hammer going on. Yeah, banning, restricting. We are not allowing our students to use it. Very prominent examples were Oxford and Cambridge, for example. Yeah, I said we restrict it, we don't allow it. And there was the other side of the coin. Universities, Greenwich was one of those. One of those universities said, we're not going to restrict it because, you know, if we say no and ban it, students will find ways of using it, and if then we have no chance of telling the students how to use it in an acceptable manner. So we were more like on the embracing side of things and started working very early on policies and adding to our academic integrity policies what is acceptable use, informed by the Office for Students, Department of Education, outputs at the time, and very lengthy discussions what is acceptable use, which goes to show that it was not an easy question to answer. Now, these institutions that have banned, very publicly banned, have U-turned, yeah, because they realized it's unbannable. It's going to be part of our daily personal and professional lives. I'm sure to a point that it's normal for us. We don't even realize anymore that there's Gen AI involved at one point. That point is not now, but it will be, I'm pretty sure. Like talking to Alexa is normal at home. Also, other reactions, early initiatives in staff training to tell the staff, all right, this is what that Gen AI thing is, and this is how you can use it. And how can you prompt? So I've run a series of prompt engineering webinars, for example, as a door opener to the understanding what can Gen AI do and what can it not do? Where are the limitations of it? What does the output look like? And it goes further, uses of AI in the classroom with the students, for the students, teaching about AI, teaching with AI. So a myriad of training rolled out by UK institutions and worldwide to educate the staff. to tell them what is that Gen AI thing. And these were understandably short-term measures to be ready for 23, 24. But we're only beginning, not just as institutions in higher education, but also as a society, what may be the long-term implications, job displacements, new jobs being created that we don't even know about yet, longevity of that technology, and what will it impact. And we're only beginning to understand that. And I'm sure that universities will react to that and hopefully even guide the discussion and direct it more instead of being reactive to it.
I'm muted. Yeah, Gerhard, and well, perhaps Emma as well. Feel free to chip in. I'm interested to know whether you think, your opinion, of course, but whether you think it's likely that any university at all now will not have yet devised some sort of, at least an interim policy around AI to some degree.
Opinion-wise?
What do you want?
I don't think so. I don't think there'll be any institution, whether it's public, private, big or small. I think every university will have to have some kind of policy regarding this. Gerhard, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, if you do Google search, just pop in the search term here on the screen, academic integrity policies in UK universities and AI. And you'll find a lot of links and a long list. Yeah. And if you put the UK away and look globally or in your country of origin, you'll see there is something. So clearly they need to deal with it, and they are dealing with it. And these policies will develop, because this is the first academic year, full academic year, with Gen AI fully in the picture. And it's moving very fast. The policies will need to adapt as we go along. To maybe entirely new ways of AI use, new ideas, new research findings. So expect these policies to change, because they will have to. They will need to adapt to what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Emma, do you think, is it the case, I think you were saying as well that, like at Greenwich as well, every module leader has been asked to kind of score their basically to review their assessment approach for every module or course, and almost kind of score it with a weighting, essentially, to say, you know, kind of how AI proof essentially is my assessment structure, something like that.
Yes, Leon, that's correct. So every program that we have, you may in your institution call those courses. We have modules, or you might call those units. And within those, across each levels, whether it's postgrad or undergrad, we've got undergrad level 4, 5, and 6, and then postgrad being level 7. In any of those, all of the modules should complement one another and should be an overall learning outcome for the year. And within those, module leaders work very hard to make sure that there is a limited possibility for misuse. So of course we cannot entirely prevent this kind of ill intent or malpractice, but yes, every module leader has been tasked to do that. That's correct.
Yeah, well, yeah, as you say as well, it'll be interesting to kind of see how this evolves over the coming months and the next years as well, how things change, how things shift. Yeah, so okay, well, shall we talk a little bit about teaching methods as well, and then I'm also keen, of course, to hear from you, Emma, on around like the coming back to this authenticity in assessment as well. But Gerhard, was there anything else you wanted to say on the slides, or is that where are you at with the slides?
So in terms of, so don't worry, I'm not going to go through that entire thing. This is because this is recorded, and the slides will be sent to participants PDF afterwards. Have a read through that, because this is just a small selection of possible potential impacts, but ultimately it will impact what we do. And that can start from that, you know, once we have AI resistance achieved to a certain degree, that it can actually enhance the learning of our students, be a facilitator, being, you know, a study buddy is for instance, a nice application of ChatGPT. Learning about, you know, challenging as we just done so far, challenging traditional assessment. Are they up to the task? Not only assessment for learning, but assessment of learning, both perspectives and a view on authentic assessment and a view on that. You know, if you look at your assessment structure in your individual modules, courses, programs, are they doing what they're supposed to do? And that is a discussion that maybe AI has pushed even further up the agenda, but that discussion has been around for quite some time. You know, are our assessment types, models, are they up to task? And this is definitely something that will impact also the teaching methods. And not teaching to the exam, but teaching for the learning and the retention and the competency and the skills. Ultimately leads us back to considering simulations in that context. And a very strong focus on ethical and responsible use, not just that we are as educators or institutions as a whole use it responsibly and ethically, but also teach and educate our students. How do you use this ethically and responsibly? Because they take that with them into their professional and personal lives later on. Skill development will be very strong focus in the teaching methods. So again, leads us back to simulations to foster AI literacy skills in everyone, not just the students, supporting inclusive education, making concepts much more accessible by having concepts explained differently, and even triggering ideas how to explain, how to teach in an educator. So as an ideation tool, generative AI is wonderful. I'm using it for ideation. Yeah, if I'm stumped with a complex concept that's coming up in my next session I need to explain, maybe I'm asking ChatGPT, can you give me 5 different analogies for that particular concept that I describe as the subject matter expert? Comes up with a couple of ideas and said, that's actually really good. I'm going to adapt that. I'm going to use this. Yeah, so this will impact us, and it will impact us on so many different levels that I can only say this list here can only be non-exhaustive. Yeah, there will be more impacts than I can put on one single slide. There will be impacts that I can't even speculate at this point yet, but it will impact.
Hey, great, thanks, Gerhard. I'm keen. I'm watching the time, of course, the clock, and I'm keen to hear from Emma on authentic assessment as well. Yeah, like it's a term that's being used a lot more and more these days as well. Would it be okay, Gerhard, if we pass things over to Emma a little bit to talk a little bit about that?
I keep sharing my screen, but these are her slides.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's correct. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to see you today. I'm going to talk about my direct experiences with using simulations, but particularly for this webinar, I'm going to be talking about the Trainer's Startup Game, which I used in one of my level 4 modules last year. Now, what's particularly unique about this experience is that all of the materials were designed ahead of much of the kind of implementation and use of AI tools such as ChatGPT. So when I originally designed the module, and I had in mind, I wanted to do something immersive, something interactive with my students, immediately a simulation came to mind. Now, I've been very lucky that I've used both tech and non-tech simulations in my career. So I've used drama role plays as well as technological simulations. But with this particular one, I wanted to really move away from company case studies. Now, there are a number of different reasons for that. Number one is obviously the potential for students to purchase assignments based on case studies. Now, we've all had experiences, I'm sure, where we have had to report plagiarism. We've had issues of company case studies becoming outdated, for example. So what I wanted to do with this is to create a scenario-based environment. So right in the designing stages of the module, and this was a marketing principles and sales management module, I wanted to allow students to have that immersive experience, but also be able to prove what they've learned in the immersive experience. Now, bringing it back to the theme of the webinar, it's all about the impact of AI. how can we make sure that students are actually learning and can prove that they can? Now, in the subsequent slides, I'll show you a small snippet of an assessment rubric that I use to assess my students in their written work. So to demystify that, I'm sure many of you are aware of rubrics, but really it's just a set of criterion with different percentage weightings that we're able to use to assess students in written or in presentation work. Now, what I found with the simulation that I used for this is that I set up 2 block teaching sessions where I had my students come in for 6 hours and play the game. And I also set them homework in tasks that they could do within their teams. I made it flexible enough that if team members needed to change, that was also okay. Because over a period of time as such, sometimes we accept that there are mitigating and exterminating, that's not the word, extenuating circumstances where people can't attend. So I think for my personal recommendation, allowing room for flexibility for team members is a very important factor there. But I think it adds that kind of real-time element to it as well, because adding a little bit of time pressure, I think as Leon mentioned and Gerhard mentioned earlier, is extremely important when it comes to designing any kind of assessment, particularly if it is authentic and emulates the real world. So what I found was by having rounds allowed students to become very visibly competitive towards one another. There's a really lovely element in the trainer's simulation that allows you to create news pieces or PR as part of the promotional mix among the 7 Ps. And it was very delightful to see students get very passionate about competing with the other teams. And because that was in real time, it really added an element of fun and interactivity that I hadn't quite anticipated in there, which was very enjoyable. But bringing it back to algorithms and data, what's interesting about using one of these simulations is that the company data, which students set targets upon to be able to see if they're going to be a cost leader, whether they're going to lead in quality, for example, in different customer segments, because they're frequently changing, it doesn't allow AI tools in this end-to-end kind of viability to be able to go in and predict what might happen in the simulation. So I think we're focusing very much on the gameplay, but also onto the assessment. So next slide, please, Gerhard. Here's a quick case study of what I used and how you can immediately implement this into your own assessments. Well, I found that, as I mentioned at the beginning of my slides, that I wanted to, from the very offset, embed the simulation into the entirety of the module. So this is a 30-credit module. It's quite a large module that runs very intensively with lots of topics. But I was able to really tailor the topics that were suitable for what I wanted students to be assessed on. So instead of me coming up with a list of, I think you mentioned earlier, if you've got 20 topics and there are 10 that are in an assessment, those other 10 are going to get lost and they're not really going to be retained by students. So what I found is that I matched the game rounds with all of the topics that I had in my module, and then matched that with the different elements of the assignment brief that I asked students to do. So one might be asking oneself, well, how do we reward students for gameplay? How do we really know what they did? Do I have to watch them for the entire time? No, absolutely not. The way that we do that is through the use of reflection. So I found that in my module, I added a 5% assessment criterion on exactly how students comment on that. Now, I've been involved in a number of assessments, and sometimes we typically have a company case study, and then we have group work, and then we maybe have a section on a reflective cycle or a group development module, I don't know, Tuckman's or Gibbs or something like that. And we allow them to talk about their experiences, future action plan. Whereas what I did this time is that I actually very clearly guided students that in every answer to their question in the application, for example, of the 7 Ps or 5 Cs, for example, what they needed to do was to use evidence to support their assertions and their claims, not just from academic texts and from industry-led sources, but also to use and reflect on how this was actually applied in the game, which students really enjoyed, and it really paid off for one very important reason. What I found is there was no detection at all of any kind of plagiarism, for example. The sources that students used were of very high quality because they needed to support the gameplay that they did. And that was really good for me as an educator, not only because I was very pleased that my students had not committed any plagiarism, and we have very robust tools to be able to check in terms of academic and industry sources, if that's the case. But what I also found on there is that it was a sense of relief that it made my job marking a lot easier, because it would have been very easy to see superficial reflections. It's very small text on here, so it's hard for you to see. But you can see in the failure category, that's in the kind of third box there, little or weak reference to engaging with the simulation game. Yes, of course, some students are going to very weakly comment on that, or they might simply put a comment on there that I participated in the round, but don't mention anything whatsoever. So this is a way that you can kind of mitigate that against really strong cases that not only connect to theory, not only connect to game rounds, but also support the discussion in an excellent manner. Gerhard, next slide, please. So finally, supporting student outcomes. Now, something that I'm very passionate, as well as learning technologies, I'm also very passionate about human interaction with our students as well. And what I like to kind of draw upon something called the pedagogy of care. So students very typically come to institutions because they want to learn, because they want peer interaction, they want to learn something and use technologies, but we also need a human element to that as well. So what I find is, and according to many studies that I've read in the literature and my own experiences, is that motivation of the tutor guiding them through the rounds and a mixture and kind of combination of those factors of peer interaction actually create a really nice relaxed class environment. Yes, there are periods where students are highly competitive, but I also find that this kind of relaxed atmosphere, but also highly supportive and human atmosphere mixed with the technology was very successful in my module. I think there are a lot of misconceptions from students about how they will enjoy using the simulations and exactly how they're going to be able to use that in their assignments. With any new technology or any new software, students can find it really difficult and can, at times see that as a burden to their learning. Oh, we're going to have to learn how to use this simulation now. I need to get used to the navigation. I've used a variety of complexity of different simulations. Some where you have to spend 2 weeks on simply learning the navigation of SAP, for example. But when it comes to web-based simulations, such as Edumundo and others, I think it's really good because it gives students that kind of takeaway that they can use it anywhere because it's web-based. They use it at home. They can learn how to actually use it very quickly. And they can have a lot of motivation from their tutor in which to use it, which I found really helped and really increased my engagement. So I hope that was helpful to you. I think we now have some time for questions, but thank you very much for listening to my reflections.
Really helpful, Emma. Thank you so much, and well, to both of you as well. I think it's really important to remember that we're all finding our feet, isn't it, with this subject, and it's an evolving landscape. And let's all support each other with this as we move forward. It's an interesting landscape as well, of course. I think it's been really interesting having this conversation. It feels like a conversation we could probably allocate 3 hours to rather than 1 hour. We've really had to try and condense, I think, a lot of the conversation here. And I know in some of our preparatory conversations, there was many more things we could have covered today as well. But really, really appreciate you putting the effort in to join us today. And thanks again. I'm just going to bring my colleague Pete in and say, I think probably, Pete, we don't have enough time to maybe open the mics for people to ask more questions, but maybe you can summarize perhaps a couple of the questions that have already been asked in the chat. Is that a good way forward, Pete?
There's been a healthy debate on particularly how simulations play into this. How much of a safe space are there? What sort of learnings, what sort of techniques and tricks might there be to make better use of those? And of course, we're very happy to follow up with those. But there's been quite a few comments as well, because as you say, Leon, we're all learning and we're all adjusting and adapting almost on a daily basis. So there's been quite a few comments about if I'm learning this, if I'm trying to get my head around everything that's going on at the moment, how can I be best placed to really support my students? So I don't know if in a matter of seconds either Gerhard or Emma have any wise words or thoughts on how to support their colleagues in institutions with what must be a real challenge.
Yeah, Emma, please, or Gerhard, please. Feel free to decide who wants to take that one.
Yeah, it does start with us, doesn't it? We need to find a way to hone our own AI literacy, and I know that this is easier said than done with everything that an educator has on their plates and more. So, an approach that I'm trying to push a little bit at Greenwich is that prompt engineering. So the purposeful construction of prompts for a desired output is not only just that, but it opens it unlocks the mind for understanding, okay, what is that Gen AI actually? What can it do and what can it not do? And then try to apply exercises with the students in class, and also to educate the students in what AI can do and cannot do. And I found I have two sets of students, those that have already played around with it and have a good understanding of it, and then those who did not go near it yet. So your institution CPDs, hopefully there are plenty of those, will also be a valuable resource to just expose yourself to the topic. That's important. Don't be afraid of it. Yeah, I know it's a lot. It's massively much coming our way, but engage with it as much as you can to get a better understanding of it and demystify it.
And finally, I think I would say, don't be afraid of using simulations with your students, and don't be afraid to actually put that into your assessment. You will get engagement, and I think students really, really enjoy it. And it's probably one of the more safer options if you're terrified of the impact of AI. I think it can really mitigate that and give you a safe and supportive, but also very interactive learning environment.
Yeah, well, completely agree. Yeah, well, thanks both for your responses there. Pete, do we have time for maybe one more question, or are we gonna leave it there?
I think we're at the top of the hour. Oops, yeah, no, I'm okay. Yeah. I think we're at the top of the hour, Leon. It's 2 o'clock on the dot now, so and can see.
Okay,
people
well, yeah, and I'm not sure. Perhaps Emma and Gerhard, perhaps you have to rush off as well. Yes. And all our guests, all our attendees, of course. But I'm just going to bring up this last slide here. That's a QR code which you can scan as attendees today if you'd like to have in any way continue the conversation with us. That will take you through to a meeting booking form to meet with Peter or I, and we can continue the conversation and explain more about how simulations can help you AI proof your assessments. We're really keen to to talk more about this subject in the coming weeks and months. Emma and Gerhard, would you like to as a follow-up, if any of the attendees would like to reach out to you or anything, if you're open to that, how can people get in touch with you?
LinkedIn, I think, is probably the best. Would you agree, Gerhard?
Yeah, LinkedIn is good place to get in touch. So I'm quite unique in my name, at least, so I'm easy to find.
Yeah, okay.
You probably noticed my hair from the photo, most likely.
I was going to say, yeah. But same with Pete and I as well. If you want to connect with us, we're quite active on LinkedIn as well. Well, thanks again to all the attendees. We're going to wrap up now. And maybe, Gerhard and Emma, I think if we were to carry on this conversation for another hour, I think it would be great to also, talk more generally about the kind of technology quotient part of it, which I think I mentioned last time as well. Let's recognize, isn't it, that students these days will have this technology at their disposal when they go into the real world of graduate and employment. So in that sense, the more equipped they are to kind of utilize this technology in their real world of work and add value. And maybe that also comes back to kind of this thing about AI literacy as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks again, everyone, for attending. We'll follow up with a recording and a summary via email, but feel free to get in touch with us if you'd like more information about the subject. And we'll also share that JISC report that we've referred to as well.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
everyone.
you.
Have a good day.
Thank you for having us.